And Snowball is starting again. Snowball is reading the longest book ever written. And so they spent their days in courtship, walking, talking, singing, and laughing together, while the Empire's business was left to subordinates. I'd like to see the staff, Barenziah said idly one day. I only had a glimpse of it, you'll recall. He frowned. Nothing would give me greater pleasure. Heart's delight. But that would be impossible. You don't trust me, Barenziah pouted, but softened her lips when he leaned over for a kiss. Nonsense, love, of course I do. But it isn't here, he chuckled. In fact, it isn't anywhere. He kissed her again, more passionately this time. You're talking in riddles again. I want to see it. You couldn't have destroyed it. Ah, you've gained in wisdom since we last met. You inspired my hunger for knowledge somewhat. She stood up. The staff of chaos can't be destroyed, and it can't be removed from Tamriel. Not without the direst consequences to the land itself. Ah, you impress me, my love. All true. It is not destroyed, and it is not removed from Tamriel. And yet, as I said, it isn't anywhere. Can you solve the puzzle? He pulled her to him, and she leaned into his embrace. Here's a greater riddle still, he whispered. How does one make one of two? That I can and will show you. Their bodies merged, limbs tangled together. Later, when they had drawn a bit apart, and he lay dozing, she thought sleepily. One of two, two of one, three of two, two of three. What cannot be destroyed or banished might be split apart, perhaps. She stood up, eyes blazing. She started to smile. The Nightingale kept the journal. He scribbled entries into it every night after quick reports from underlings. It was locked in a bureau, but the lock was a simple one. She had, after all, been a member of the Thieves' Guild in a past life, in another life, another Barenziah. One morning, Barenziah managed to sneak a quick look at it while he was occupied at his toilet chamber pot. She discovered that the first piece of the Staff of Chaos was hidden in an ancient dwarvish mine called Fanglair. Although its location was given only to the vaguest of terms, the diary was crammed with jotted events in odd shorthand and was very hard to decipher. All Tamriel, she thought, in his hands and mine, and more perhaps, and yet, for all his exterior charm, there was a cold emptiness where his heart should have been, a vacuum of which she was quite unaware. She thought one could glimpse it now and then, when his eyes would go blank and hard, and yet, though he had a different concept of it, he yearned for happiness too, and contentment. Peasant dreams, Barenziah thought, and straw flashed before her eyes again, looking lost and sad, and then Theris with a feline Khajiit smile. Tiber Septim, powerful and lonely. Symmetrus, solid and stolid. Solid and stolid. Symmetrus, who did what ought to be done, quietly and efficiently. The Nightingale, a riddle and a certainty, both the darkness and the light. The Nightingale who would rule all and more, and spread chaos in the name of order. Barenziah got reluctant leave from him to visit her children, who had yet to be told of their father's death and of the Emperor's offer of protection. She finally did, and it wasn't easy. Morga clung to her for what seemed an era. sobbing wretchedly, while Helseth ran off into the garden to be alone, afterward refusing all her attempts to speak to him on the subject of his father, or even let her hold him to her breast. Eldware called on her while she was there. She told him what she had discovered so far, explaining that she must remain a while and yet learn more as she could. The nightingale teased her about her elderly admirer. He was quite aware of Eldware's suspicion, but he wasn't the least bit perturbed, for no one took the old fool seriously. Barenziah even managed to arrange a reconciliation of sorts between them. Eldware publicly recanted his misgivings, and his old friend, the Emperor, forgave him. He was afterward invited to dine with them at least once a week. The children, like Eldware, even Helseth, disapproved of his mother's liaison with the Emperor and consequently detested him. He had become surely and he became surly and temperamental as the days passed, and frequently quarreled with both his mother and her lover. Eldware was not happy with the affair either, and the nightingale took great delight at times in openly displaying his affection for Barenziah, just to nettle the old man. They could not marry, of course, for Uriel Septim was already married, at least not yet. The nightingale had exiled the emperor shortly after taking the emperor's place, but had not dared harm her. She was given sanctuary by the temple of the one it had been given out that she was suffering from ill health, and rumors had been circulated by the nightingale's agents that she had mental problems. He called her crazy. The emperor's children had likewise been dispatched to various prisons all across Tamriel disguised as schools. She'll grow worse in time, Nightingale said carelessly, referring to the Empress and eyeing Barenziah's swollen breasts and swelling belly with satisfaction. As for their children, well, life is full of hazards, isn't it? We'll be married. Your child will be my true heir. He did want the child. He did want the child. Barenziah was sure of that. She was far less sure, however, of his feelings for her. They argued continually now, often violently, usually about Helseth, whom he wanted to send away to school in Somerset Isle, the province furthest from the imperial city. Barenziah made no effort to avoid these altercations. The nightingale, after all, had no interest in smooth, unruffled life, and besides, he thoroughly enjoyed making up afterwards. Occasionally, Barenziah would take the children and retreat to their old apartment, declaring she wanted no more to do with him, but he would always come to fetch her back, and she would always let herself be fetched back. It was ineffable, like the rising and setting of Tamriel's twin moons. She was 6 months pregnant before she finally deciphered the location of the last staff piece, an easy one since every dark elf knew where the Mount of Dagoth-Ur was. When she next quarreled with the nightingale, she simply left the city with Edware and rode hard for High Rock and Wayrest. The nightingale was furious, but there was little he could do. His assassins were rather inept, and he dared not leave his seat of power to pursue them in person, nor could he openly declare war on Wayrest. He had no legitimate claim on her or her unborn child. True to form, the imperial city's nobility had disapproved of his liaison with Barenziah, as they had so many years ago of Tiber Septims, and were glad to see her go. Wayrest was equally distrustful of her, but Edware was fanatically loved by his prosperous little city-state, and allowances were readily made for his eccentricities. Barenziah and Edward were married a year after the birth of her son by the nightingale. But Barenziah and Edward were married a year after the birth of her son by the nightingale. In spite of this unfortunate fact, Edward doted on her and her children. She, in return, did not love him, but she was fond of him. And that was something. It was nice to have someone, and Wayrest was a very good place. A good place for the children to grow up. While they waited and bided their time and prayed for the champion's success in his mission. Barenziah could only hope that he wouldn't take very long. Whoever this unnamed champion was, she was a dark elf, and she had all the time in the world, all the time, but no more love left to give, and no more hatred left to burn. She had nothing left, nothing but pain and memories. And her children, she only wanted to raise her family and provide them a good life, and be left to live out what remains of hers. She had no doubt it was going to be a long life yet, and during it she wanted peace and quiet and serenity, and her soul as well as her heart. Of her soul as well as her heart. Peasant dreams. That was what she wanted. That was what the real Barenziah wanted. That was what the real Barenziah was. Peasant dreams. Peasant dreams. I hope there's another book in this series, because Snowball wants to know what happened to the blasted Chaos Staff. Snowball wants the Chaos Staff. Snowball hopes there's another book, but Snowball has not found a sixth book. Well, Snowball will try to release this, probably going to be 3-parter, as soon as possible, all on the same day. Have a good day, and see you at the next book.